myself. So I'm very grateful to share with all of you, and thankful to you, Chris, for getting things going in the background. So let's give us a moment to prepare. Pop. Okay. Here we come. Just allowing the television to warm up. I will make a little break partway through the talk, so of course there'll be a moment to rest or go to the bathroom or anything like that. And if there's any questions at any time, I like to invite in conversation. So please feel free to pause me or make a question during the presentation. So this second iteration of the talk, the first one that I gave was a real collection of my distillation of my own ideas around regeneration, regenerating our world. I've now developed this further and split the talk into two. So tonight I'm going to be talking about regenerative design, how we can reimagine our world in a way that encourages life. And I'm inspired by this mission of Heck, restoring human connection to all beings, beginning with ourselves. As within, so without. And so it's a great opportunity for me to explore deepening this connection through my own personal practice here, and with such deep people, and at the same time to hold space for visions of the outer work, and to bring those things together so that they can feed off each other. A company that I started at the beginning of this year is called Pale Blue, so I'm just going to talk a little bit about that to begin with, and then I'll walk through some of this regenerative design with all of you. Pale Blue, the title of this company, comes from this image initially, which is kind of grainy. There'll be some more coming. This little dot is our home world here, this pale blue dot. The phrase the pale blue dot comes from Carl Sagan, the astrophysicist. I don't know if any of you know. He turned the Voyager probe round and took this image from beyond Saturn. He gave a beautiful speech that came to be known as the pale blue dot, and in it he said, "There's no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this pale blue dot. How futile and pointless seems our bickering, our competition on this tiny home world when we expand this frame of understanding, of view." So I give the Earthrise picture here as well, another pale blue reflection, a view from outside. From 1968, the Apollo landings, which really gave birth to the environmental movement, and I believe in that this image is such a catalyst for our collective loving action of our home worlds and our connection. And another pale blue dot image from beyond Saturn there in beautiful high fidelity from the Cassini probe. So just on pale blue, before we begin, I found this great archive of images of our home world, where we are now turning, shot from 1 million miles away, stitched together by satellite. And as we see the Earth turn into the light of our sun, our pale blue planet, I invite you all to just really drink in this image. This is the frame that we'll begin this talk with. That we are part of a huge collective and connected organism, and we are relearning how to connect with this pale blue home planet, this superorganism which depends on us as much as we depend on it now. This transformation that we're going through from being the hungry caterpillar that has eaten and suckled so hard from the mother has now closed into this chrysalis of the end of capitalism perhaps, or the chrysalis of COVID, this stillness that we're in now. What butterfly will emerge in our future? As you see the world turn, I invite you, with your imagination, to project onto the planet and reverse time, spinning the world back through countless billions of years until it was a ball of molten rock, cooling in the enveloping cosmic dark. How this ball of rock came to be a living, breathing organism, Gaia, Pachamama, Earth. I think this is a miracle of life, how life creates the conditions for itself over time, and how a ball of molten rock came to breathe in space, learnt to breathe for itself. As we take in this reflection, I invite you to consciously and deeply take 2 breaths. One of those was made by ocean life. The other breath was made by plants of the soil. The oxygen of our planet is generated by all these life processes, and we breathe together or not at all. That our exhalations are the inhalations of plant life, and their exhalations are our inhalations. And that really brings us to this connection of inner and outer vision. When we connect with the breath and we deepen in ourselves, if we remember this view, this collective and inclusive view, it's that breath that unites us all in a profound and practical way. Just let the planet turn a moment, and then I shall begin the talk. Because really this planet is in a time of pain now, in a time of painful change. The host organism which we all make up, which we're all part of, her waters are becoming acid and her air is becoming choked. And it's easy to forget, surrounded by this beauty and this verdant green, that there's great pain occurring on the planet. And there's much work to do. But I feel this work is not worthy. It should be creative and joyful. As we relearn the processes of life that have turned this from a ball of rock into the breathing organism it is now, we can have fun and dance with those processes, these principles of life, the behaviours, the tendencies of life. So it's these behaviours, these tendencies of life that I'd like to talk through with you now. So this is the first time I've shared a vision of pale blue and allowed myself to kind of poetically explore that. So I'm very grateful for your listening and presence, and it will continue to grow. Thank you. Okay, I didn't want to cut that abruptly, so that ran really nicely to time. Now this image of a curling river, it's just a reminder that from rock, from physics, biology became, life processes became. And these life processes work in some particular ways, and as we learn from them, these regenerative principles, we can learn to live in a way that creates life. And this is what I'd like to talk to you about this evening, how we can apply these principles to design. Just begin with this Chinese proverb, that when the winds of change blow, some build walls, others build windmills. I feel it's a very profound piece of wisdom, and it's quite self-evident what it's meaning there. It's such a pantomime world that we live in now, so extreme, the caricatures of build a wall, keep them out, resistance, constriction, separation. But the winds of change are blowing harder and faster now than they've done before. So more than ever, we need to build windmills and become windmills ourselves. So if walls are things, objects of separation, then windmills are processes of connection. They're in active communication with the environment, in dance with it. Oop. Sorry, not sure what happened there. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you about these three principles. They're my own distillation. There are great frameworks out there, from biomimicry to permaculture. And these are just three principles I've distilled along the way. They're very much processes themselves. So embracing energy flows. I'm going to go through each one in turn with some illustrations. As we embrace energy flows, we bring our creativity to extend those flows of energy. They show up in forms of water, heat, or wind. Cycling nutrients is the second principle I'll talk about, which requires us to allow death and decay. It's known as eliminating waste when we talk about cycling nutrients, and I'll come on to that. Circular economies and such. And multi-purpose. This third principle, its name has rather eluded me, and I've landed back on multi-purpose. Stacking functions, diversifying. But it speaks to those things. Diverse functions, being adaptive, being multifaceted. And we all have these tendencies as well, just as we are life processes too. Just playing with that slide, I suddenly had an inspiration while I was lying down to write what these regenerative principles are not. So these degenerative principles, which come out of our industrial and mechanistic machine thinking phase that I hope we're coming out of now, is about forcing energy, constricting it, capturing it, maybe in a dam, or extracting nutrients. We talk about farming, but really our systems of farming are more like mining. We're just pulling nutrients out of the soil, extracting them, and not returning anything. Or monopurpose, just having a single function, separating functions and communication. So let's begin in the positive, with embracing and extending energy flows. And I'll just give you some examples of how this shows up. In natural systems, we see this beautiful meandering of a river, the dances of rivers. You see on some terrain how they trace different movements across a landscape through the seasons. All rivers have a dance, and they move because they're embraced by the landscape, wanting to extend their flow, and that creates many more opportunities for life to flourish and occur. If we straightened out this river, it would be such a long line. So how this shows up in design, the ancient practice of terracing, which we see all over here in Ibiza, certainly more in arid climates. Increasing the surface area of hillsides so that we can slow and embrace the flows of water and hold the soil. This is a beautiful example of generating power from water, a hydroelectric whirlpool, that you can see the natural design principle there, and in a way of creating that encourages life, fish can swim straight through this. Maybe somewhat surprised, but undamaged. Water wheels need no explanation. Another form of embracing water is dew harvesting. Something that I think actually would be very good here on this island. Embracing precipitation. Some other examples of dew harvesting, which seem to have only recently occurred to the sort of modern consciousness, have been practiced for a long time. On the left is this huge, beautiful stone dome, which is a dew condenser, because stones hold their temperature, and every night as the sun plays water up and down the air, it condenses around this structure and runs into a channel that feeds a town or a village. There's a lovely story about an ancient community with these spoilt burial mounds, or so they were thought, on the hills around this town. They were great pyramids of round stones. They felt they must be burial mounds or memorials of some kind. So one was excavated and pulled apart, and there was nothing inside. And they discovered later, with some more analysis of the ground, that there were channels of slate running from under these pyramids, and they were dew condensers. They created thousands of litres of fresh water from the air every night for people to drink and use in the morning. This is kind of intergenerational infrastructure, things that we can build that will outlast our lives, require little or no maintenance. And when we start to build for the long term, for 7 generations ahead, as some traditions have it, then we start to make our constructions and our designs beautiful because they're part of our landscape. We care about how they appeal to us aesthetically. Here's a design for a dew harvesting system in Africa that suits the climate there, which is also very sculptural. Bringing out our creativity in this design of extending and embracing the flows of energy, water in this case. There's an example here of these cups which I realise are on hinges, so when water runs off the roof, instead of being shot down a pipe and sped up, as is a common way, which then needs a great drain or reservoir to hold that accelerated water energy where it's being wasted, if we bring our creativity into this process and slow it down, these cups as they fill with water tip into each other and empty. A beautiful thing to watch when it's raining, a celebration of the rain even. Similarly, instead of a pipe here, these polished riverbed stones. Every time it rains, they're brought to glistening life with the water. Further on creativity, there's this instrument that's been built for the ocean to play. It's in Croatia. These steps are hollow. You can see the organ pipe structure underneath. And as the waves lap against these steps, the sea plays its own deep tune. And there's people lying there listening and enjoying this. So when I talk about embracing energy flows, I don't just mean for efficiency or just to be good to life, actually bringing out our creativity and having fun with how we dance with the elements in this way. Here's a house in, I think it's in Berlin actually, certainly in Germany, where the rain pipes have been turned into instruments, so the rain plays a tune whenever it happens. Another celebration. I thought it was beautiful. And couldn't help adding this staircase that's also a piano, which speaks maybe more to the third principle. It's like the thought of people coming late in the house, hearing how out of tune or drunk they might be. So water bridging to heat. Another kind of passive technology and embracing of the energy that's naturally occurring is geothermal, which needs little explanation, allowing water to fall to the planet's hot emanations and then rising again to do work for us in whatever way that might occur. And geothermal springs, celebrating those natural flows of hot water. Moving from heat to solar heat. It's often said that our planet's a closed system. We hear it in phrases like spaceship Earth. The planet is sealed off and we're all crew on this spaceship. But actually, energetically, it's an open system. And solar income is really the only income that we have. And we should be learning to spend and embrace it more. This is a power station in Spain, where solar energy is collected and concentrated to this point, making almost a terrestrial sun. This doesn't feel so in tune with the embracing and extension of energy flows, but it is a celebration and a capturing of solar energy, this abundance that's showered on us. And of course, in greenhouses and the beautiful Eden project there, with the geodesic design by Buckminster Fuller himself, whose spirit I feel is coming more alive today than it has been. Wind, of course, old forms of embracing wind energy and wind turbines from the first slide in that Chinese proverb. On the right, I just put this link to New Dawn Traders. I'm lucky enough to know Alex Geldenhays, who's the director of New Dawn Traders, a sail shipping company. And they've brought sail shipping back to freight, and they actually bring mezcal and rum and cacao from Central America to Europe, and they run, I think they have actually a fleet of sail ships now. They've had some philanthropic support to start, and now they're really managing to run very high-grade products, completely carbon neutral, ready for the collapse of the oil industry, which feels well upon us. So just wanted to give some real-world examples there of people preparing for this change, and perhaps some beautiful hybrid in the future of an electric supportive engine and sail ships. I think when we're creative and we start to multiply functions and act in diverse ways, then There are many possibilities as yet unexplored. A little bit more on wind. This design that I was reminded of by someone that came to visit us here, Marcio Baradas, who I know through the CL Foundation. He has a 3D printing company turning plastic waste into useful products like this wind turbine inspired by a tree, sitting much more comfortably in the landscape, actually much more efficient than this design of a windmill. It's always felt a bit odd to me, industrial, all that weight pressing on the hub there, rather than sitting upright and turning freely. This is a top-down view of a new generation wind turbine, very compact ones that can generate a huge amount of energy for the home. Again, if we're embracing these elements, there's so much to be captured and to use nearby. And this helical design, which I think is beautiful, this double helix wind turbine, which I just discovered working up this presentation. There's a little moment to pause from listening to me now. I'd like to just share this video by an amazing sculpture artist, which I think is probably one of the most masterful examples of really embracing the energetic flow of the wind. So I invite you to just take in this video. Mesmerizing designs inspired by nature remind me of some even marine creatures, jellyfish movement or a feather star. And there's a sensitivity and a consciousness at work here which is in deep and intimate loving connection with the flow of wind. Bless you. And think how creatively rich our world can become when we start to take nourishment on local forms and ways of creatively embracing the flows of energy all around us. Again, they're really built for the long term, you know, to last hundreds of years, for generations ahead.
I see one of those right there.
Keep projecting. Let's all bring it into being. So thank you for making it through that first principle. How's everyone's energy and attention? Oh. Thank you. So the second principle, cycling nutrients, or eliminating waste. We speak of it as we approach this project to eliminate waste from our world. I think it's a helpful frame to consider our planet as we saw it turning, and that it's like its skeleton, its bone structure is the geosphere, a sphere of stone and tectonic motion, very slow. And on top of that is the biosphere, the sphere of life. Chemistry is the bridge between those spheres. And on top of that, bridged perhaps by us, is the technosphere, as it's been named by some. We could extend further and talk about the noosphere, the sphere of knowledge beyond. But for now, the biosphere, being so mature, is in deep harmony with itself and with the geosphere. Our technosphere is a more recent arrival, an upstart, still very disruptive. But I believe that our maturity and growth will bring our technosphere into harmonious communication with the biosphere. And to do so, it will embody the principles of the biosphere. And this is what I mean by eliminating waste. And the principle is cycling nutrients, which we see so well in that master cycle of the seasons, that phenomenon of our turning planet and its tilt. tilting us through hot and cool, growth and death, and all the liminal phases in between. This is the template for our technosphere, for our maturity. And as part of it, we have to embrace and allow death to occur. So it's an example of a biosphere cycle, one fitting to Ibiza and to so many places actually. The soils are very deteriorated here, and it's because we have been ploughing them for a long time. This is a form of extraction, a degenerative principle. Well, the microbial life is happily living in concert, and then we turn everyone upside down and mix it all up, and they can't survive that. But we get a lot of nutrients out of it very quickly. So regenerative agriculture that's restoring our soils is one part of this. And as we grow our food in a more sustainable way and cook that food, it comes a part that we don't talk about, that we have a phobia of. And we don't deal with our shit, literally. And we find it hard to talk about, and we have a taboo around our poo, around our waste. And I do find it really sad when I allow myself to contemplate that without any of this like cultural tension, that every time we're nearly finishing this cycle, we just send the nutrients away, out of sight and out of mind. And really that's a kind of act of violence where we've taken from the earth, and then we've forgotten to make a contribution back. And of course there are good reasons for not being in close contact with our shit, like it's not pleasant, but actually ways to close these loops and to bring this cycling of nutrients back into our design. There are some amazing systems now. I was really lucky to meet Sandra, the director of Ibiza and Formentera Preservation. She's doing incredible work, regenerative systems design across the Balearics, and I was talking to her. I'm hoping to meet up with her soon and see what projects I could support or hear more about what's going on. But Ibiza doesn't even have a municipal system for composting. In October they're going to be setting up a system here which effectively burns organic waste and captures some methane. It's a bit better than just doing nothing with it, not even allowing it to rot back into the soil. But it's only a step of the way there. And really I think what this looks like is every home or collection of homes having an anaerobic digester, which is like a stomach, which can take in all of our food waste, cooked food, turn it back into fertilizer and gas, which we can then burn to cook the food which we eat, and so forth. So there are some amazing systems for this now, and I feel in this time of transformation and change there's so much energy in the sustainable systems and regenerative design communities saying, if not now, then never. And governments are being mobilized, and there's a lot of work happening. So very fast we can rebuild our soils. When we take inspiration from that cycle for our technosphere, for plastics and metals, these extracted materials, we have so much waste, and waste is just nutrients that aren't in cycling, aren't in circulation. So suddenly these great mountains of waste become mountains of treasure, really, as we learn to metabolize them and bring them into circulation. I remember Astrid, or talking with Astrid before about, she had this description of monsters being that which is bigger when it's outside ourselves. Is that a fair paraphrasing? And our personal monsters being these things that take on so much scale and scope, we find it very hard to engage with them, but when we bring them inside they become very small, part of a nutritive process. Doing that shadow work, bringing those things in, and I feel like on a larger scale, the landfills of our world today, these great stinking piles of waste, are the monsters on a macro scale which we will begin to start integrating now. I feel there really is a relationship there. And so we take something like a grinder like this that we can put plastic bottles into, and then tip those flakes or pellets into an extruder which spits out a plastic cable which we feed into a 3D printer and print an object of use until it breaks and it's returned into this cycle. As we start to create these cycles of value, there's so much waste out there that can be turned into gold, into nutrients. This is actually a picture from Marcio's deck of some nets that they set up. I can't remember where it was in Spain now. And they extracted something like 80% of that waste was usable plastic, which some of that plastic went into 3D printing ventilators, an open source project he started at the peak of COVID, and shared designs for those ventilators that could be printed from waste. So really amazing to see the ingenuity there. This is a collection of ocean plastic scheme that he set up, and he said something quite beautiful, that if there's no story, people don't remember or engage with it. There has to be narrative, and that's why this collection tank is a fish. It's telling a story of the sea and of the toxic waste there. People want to see the fish filled up, something that we can really engage with and remember as well, rather than just a kind of out of sight bin. I actually just added this slide this afternoon because I got sent a picture of this receipt by a friend from Norway. I was delighted when I visited there that I was there on quite a budget, and food is very expensive. And someone said to me, you should just collect some bottles and cans if you need a bit of extra pocket money, because you get a really good return on them. So I was amazed to see, like, every supermarket has this kind of machine where you can just put bottles or cans in, and you get 8 kronas. That's pretty substantial. It's like 10 euros or something from a couple of bottles. There's no reason why we don't have these schemes here in Ibiza, everywhere, right? It's just about creating the rest of that process, like the technosphere cycle that I showed you. And we start to incentivize people, then we all engage. Suddenly, all that waste, those monsters, do really become value that people are seeking. And in this time of economic collapse, I can think of no better way than engaging people in the project of bringing this waste into nutrient cycle. I won't dwell on this. Ellen MacArthur Foundation is one that I just highly value, that designs circular economy systems around the world. The third principle is multi-purpose or multifunctionality. So if we think of the example of a tree, kind of central keystone organism, it's not just doesn't just have an agenda for itself to propagate more trees. It does a lot of things. Does anyone have any thoughts or would like to share something that trees do beyond themselves? Any functions that they have?
Home.
Home. Yeah, home, habitats.
Create oxygen.
Create oxygen. Right on. Yeah. They breathe. They provide shade.
Hugger.
To be hugged, to hug back. They do both.
Yeah.
Well, we neutralize the earth.
That's right, yeah. They hold the soil.
Well,
Bring
carbs back into the earth.
Oh, they actually, yeah, bring nutrition into the soil, yeah. There's always going to be more to add to this list, and I think that's one there. So many functions. A habitat, like someone said, home, storing water. They make rain, they draw precipitation out of the air. They have factories of sap. The time?
They count the time.
They count the time?
Circles.
Ah, yes. That's another great one. Yeah. Yeah, timekeepers.
Yeah.
Hold nests.
Hold nests, habitats for birds, mammals.
The ground.
They hold the ground. You say?
They hold the ground.
They hold the ground together. Yeah. They stop the erosion. They collect solar energy. They provide shade from the sun. They're cities of bacteria. They create fruit and nuts, sustenance, and they're wisdom keepers. They hold knowledge of the surrounding ecosystem. So when we look to natural systems, we don't really find anything that just has a singular purpose. You know, like a post box is for posting mail into, it doesn't do anything else. So this is what I mean about multi-purpose and mono-purpose. So many of our designs are created for a single function. And as a result, they cancel out or erase all kinds of other things that they could do. Here's an example of the Tranquility Base. I believe it's in Colorado. Some amazing sustainability designers designed this. They actually got a brief from NASA. This is the Sustainability Base. They were briefed to create a Tranquility Base, a building on the moon. and they rejected that proposal by NASA and said, if we can't create a building that's net positive, that's generating more than it takes, then we shouldn't be trying to reach to the moon yet. So they were actually really supportive with that, and they created this federal building for NASA, which generates more power and holds and captures more water than it consumes. So it's a net positive building. And it does that because it has so many functions. The way that it collects sunlight, the way that it captures dew, a lot of the things that I've already talked about are going on in this building. It's all made out of materials that can be recirculated and repurposed. The whole building could be cannibalized into another project. In Norway again, the Svart Hotel is the world's first energy positive hotel. So it's actually a power station too, using geothermal power, and its roof is a solar power station. So when we start to talk about net positive, I think this is really beautiful. This is like a financial speak for regenerative or generative, and that there's a net gain. When our habitats create more than they take, I feel this is our maturity, this is our goal. This is when we're really reconnected to the world. And we do this through diversifying functions as well as those other principles. This slide here is the design. I think this is a design for actually somewhere in France. It's like a wind turbine viaduct. And it just inspired me to think about these projects for creating solar roads. So we have power stations, they just have one purpose, making power. We have roads, and they have one purpose of funneling traffic. When we start to integrate these functions, what if our transport networks were our power stations? And they would be distributed, there would be no separation. Again, this dam is a depiction of really constricting energy flows and forcing them. A lot of animals can't survive such a construction, flooding of those lands. Dams have been some of the most damaging and compromised environmental designs that we've had, where hydropower has been seen as green, but it's actually destroyed valleys and caused so much damage. And it's this form of constriction, collecting enough water, amassing, it's like this growing, this malignant attitude, and then forcing it out, instead of this like whirlpool generator that I showed you before. And we all turn the tap on and give no thought for this huge sequence of gates and channels all the way back up the pipeline. In Portland, Oregon, they've started building turbines, water turbines, into their municipal water pipes. So all of this water that's flowing under us from the civic infrastructure, when we start to build loops and we start to capture and embrace the energy flows which we've channeled, then we're generating power in a distributed way, in a more caring way. I just give this slide on social multi-purpose because another way of communing with life. This first image is about, it was a TED talk by someone that was speaking to a landowner, and he was struggling to eradicate crows because they were eating his crops. And he had this difficult discussion with this landowner, this farmer, and was hearing about how resilient crows were, everything that he tried, they learnt very fast, and he couldn't get rid of them. So this guy went away from the dinner party thinking, okay, well if that's not an option, what are the other options? What mutually beneficial, what positive relationship could we have with crows? There's the animal psychologist B.F. Skinner created something called the Skinner box, which is a simple system of reward. You may have two keys, for instance, and if a pigeon pecks one, it releases some grain, and the other one, it doesn't release grain, and it learns to peck that button. So he created a Skinner box for crows. And it was a bit of a trick. First it was this tray that had coins and nuts in. And the Skinner box was built into it. So this crow found this tray of nuts and coins and knocked the coins out the way to eat the nuts. Some of the coins fell into a slot and they released another nut in a tray underneath. So then the crow ate that nut and knocked the rest of the coins in and ate the nuts. Now there's no coins or nuts. The crow very quickly remembers where it saw a coin before on the street, flies off, brings it back. And so he created this system of reward where he built Skinner states and assigned them to different charities where crows are flying and collecting something like $500,000 of loose change are dropped on the streets every year. And we've created an environment where crows are being rewarded for working with finding our lost value and being rewarded for that. And I just think it's a really beautiful example of when we become adaptive and we learn to embrace the species around us instead of trying to separate them. This is a real windmill, to go back to the first example, rather than a wall, you know. And just again on kind of multi-purpose, now we're seeing people actually take exercise to clean up beaches and collect plastic really seriously and build it into their exercise routine, so it's not doing these things separately. Seeing someone being paid poorly to walk around and collect litter, and we're running through these spaces and ignoring this waste around us. So we're really starting to bring these systems together now. And as we start to value this waste, this plastic, and we can use it, there's more incentive there. Good Gym is an amazing project started in London, spread around the UK now, which is like care in the community mixed with exercise. So if you have a running route that goes past an elderly person's home, and they can't collect their own shopping, and you pass a shop, then they've just put those things together and added these functions and these levels of care and connection to what was already occurring. So you pick up the shopping for an elderly person and almost certain not to snooze your alarm or give up on going for a run that day because someone's dependent on you, right? And how good you feel after taking some exercise and caring for someone as well. So all these forms of connection, I feel this one principle helps us arrive at some of these designs: multi-purpose, multifunctionality. So there's a summary there of embracing and extending energy flows, cycling nutrients, leaving no waste or eliminating waste, and multi-purpose. These are just 3 distillations of mine. There are many frameworks out there. Capra has these 5 ecological principles. One species waste is another species food. Matter cycles continuously through the web of life, similar to cycling nutrients. Solar energy, that only blessed income that we have, drives all ecological cycles. Diversity assures resilience. And life did not take over the planet by combat, but by networking, cooperation and partnership. So when we bring all these things together, we learn to design for life. This is just the last part of the talk now, something that might inform a workshop which I would like to run in the future. It's inspired by a workshop for the Tate in London. We brought people together to look at the question, how do we create life through our daily actions? It's something that's kind of been running through this talk. I love this example, it's a historical one. Something that was common in the Ottoman Empire, where the streets we pave our streets with stones like this. And there are many thirsty friends out there on the streets. The Ottomans had a principle to carve every X number of cobblestones concave so that it would collect rainwater, and there would always be places for animals and strays to drink from. So designing for life, rather than just evacuating, getting rid of those resource flows like water. What happens when we begin to capture them? What life do we invite? Another example is it feels so sad seeing high-rise buildings, especially in this time. I was really moved and touched leaving London just after COVID and getting back to the UK, and I thought at that time, in the summer heat as well, people trapped inside buildings. You know, my heart goes out having a lack of green spaces like this. But when we start to bring it together into living buildings, vertical gardens, and these living facades, maybe the high-rise design is done anyway, but this is still inspiration to a new and more nourishing environment, habitat. In my former life as a builder, in restoration, some houses, you know, they would have an environmental assessment, and if there was something living there, it had to be cared for. So in the southwest of the UK, there were quite a lot of houses that had masonry bees living in the walls. And if those walls were rebuilt, they had to be built with bricks, every certain number of bricks that were already a home for those bees, not to displace them. I think that's beautiful, right? Our habitat is habitats for others. And it really is this perspective of seeing the whole and the parts and how they interact. This is this kind of pale blue view that we're ecologies and ecosystems ourselves as we begin to take care of our nutrition, because we care about what lives in our gut and how that affects our mood. So must we extend this feeling to our home habitats to nourish the life around us as it nourishes us. Marcio popping up in this talk again, who I mentioned before. Bless you. the guy doing 3D printing, the Zero Waste Lab. He's soon to set up a small factory, a manufactory in Barcelona that can turn plastic waste into useful objects. He created these planters from ocean plastic, like the fish that we saw that collected this plastic waste. And he printed these, well, they're not one thing or another in this multi-purpose principle. They're a bench, somewhere you can lock your bike, but they're also a planter for fruit trees, somewhere you could take some sustenance while you're sitting and watching the sea, hopefully by some point unpolluted by plastics, so sitting on them. This example of a postbox. I wonder how creative we could get with our designs. Instead of taking this single function object and we add functions. So maybe a wind turbine, we could charge our phone, could be a faucet so we can fill up our canteen, may even have space for something to grow there, which may attract other creatures to live and bathe. And as we add all these functions to these monofunction things in our environment, I believe we can have a lot of fun with this design. It's a creative, just a creative activity to explore how rich we could make our built environment if we really went down this direction. And we end up with things that are, this is just a formula here, maybe the beginning of a workshop, but then we end up with things that resemble more like the trees around us, with all of those functions that we just looked through before. So just going to finish with a couple of notes on Ibiza, where we are now. And that's the end of the talk. Yeah, I had this great conversation this morning in the hub with Sandra, who I mentioned, and she sent me a report for the Green Balearics, this project to plant 1 million trees across the Balearic Islands by 2025. And as I'm reading this, I'm really feeling the energy and charge, and also a kind of a joy and a sense of victory that finally now we have goals that we can engage in and really bring our energy together, collective action. These are some of the kind of key goals of this plan: regenerate our soils, regreen our land, increase our eco-literacy and urban agriculture. I hope some of this talk goes like a little way towards the third one. On the sea, improving seawater quality, regreen our Posidonia prairies. This Posidonia oceana, I believe, I just discovered this morning and looked into a little bit. It's a seagrass that lives around the island. It's really in decline. And I put a post on Facebook to say I'm in Ibiza, hit me up, Regenerators, who's doing stuff in renewable power, regenerative agriculture, and it really exploded, this post. And someone that contacted me is someone that I worked with before but never got to complete a project. She's called Celia Gregory. Her project is the Marine Foundation. She builds these sculptures. You may have seen some by another artist. And these sculptures are seeded with coral, and they grow into a coral reef. We had a project in Croatia for the launch of Obanjon Island, and sadly had to cancel the commission of a sculpture by her, which was going to be part of a freediving program which linked with breathwork also, to bring people into the water. And we were going to have a gallery of marine photography so that people could seed coral, or perhaps in this case seagrass, and that they might want to come back then the following year and see how what they'd planted has grown. So I like this link between a kind of creative interaction with the natural world necessarily draws us into the future to think about the growth of our efforts, rather than it just being like a, I did that, you know. You would want to come back, right, and see how these things grow. So this is part of the plan to plant an edible forest garden of 1 million trees by 2025. And very, very quickly we've iterated this understanding from like, okay, we need to plant 1 trillion trees. And some people thinking we can just pine trees. No, these have to be really diverse and multi-function forests that can provide food. So we're going to see a lot of people working hard on this. And I think this is a particularly lush picture from one of the Balearics of what a food forest might look like, where we have, wait, come on, you know, the large canopy trees, the wisdom keepers, right down to fruiting shrubs and berries. So we understand now how to create these food forests and to regenerate our world with them. and by virtue of that ourselves. And that's it. That's the title of second talk I'd like to do in a series, or to run a workshop, which is on language of connection.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Oh, look at this.
Two satellites at the same time?
What is it?
I want to see.
If I knew, I would have not.
Yeah, it's like
Yeah,
At the
it
same
was
time.
two stars
moving at the
not,
same time.
not together, far, moving at the same speed in the same direction.
And now they're gone.
We are watching it.
That was my.
I hope that was a positive audience.